Emily Dickinson and God. Her relationship with the Almighty, or not, is about as contentious as any relationship in which you would hope to find yourself or hope not to find yourself. It just depends on which reading it is that we're giving any poem at any point in time. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another poetry discussion, which will appear in two separate poetry lists here on the channel, two different playlists here on the channel. Number one being the poetry discussion playlist, now cruising towards 800 videos strong, and number two being the Emily Dickinson playlist, now approaching 250 videos dedicated to the greatest poet that ever there was. The poem in question today is known as I Know That He Exists. I'm not going to get into it yet, but it reads as such. I know that He exists. Somewhere, in silence, He has hid His rare life from our gross eyes. 'Tis an instant's play, 'tis a fond ambush, just to make bliss earn her own surprise. But should the play prove piercing, earnest, should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare, would not the fun look too expensive? Would not the jest have crawled too far? So the poem is saying, I know that God exists and He hides from our eyes. I don't think gross is used in the fashion as yuck. I think that gross here is used as in gross, many. But I know that God exists. Now, we're assuming that this He is God. There are other things that He could be, but we'll assume for this reading that we're talking about God. And He hides from our eyes. And He will reveal Himself to us in an instant. Boom. An instant's play. A fond ambush. Just to make bliss worth it. But should the play prove piercing, earnest, should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare, what if, when God appears, He is not jubilant? What if we're not ready for that appearance? Would not the fun look too expensive? That moment with God would lead to your death. Would not the jest have crawled too far? Would not that surprise be too much? Would not that have been too much on the behalf of God? Now, I want to give you two different interpretations here. One is an earnest interpretation, taking this poem at face value. It reminds me of a conversation I had when I was in grad school with a particularly religious individual. He had dedicated his life, he had moved across the country to attend this specific sect of church. It sounded to me a lot like a cult, but I will not accuse it of that. It was extreme Christian fundamentalism. And one of the conversations that I got into with this guy was about belief. And I thought I was under perhaps the misinterpretation, perhaps the misapprehension, that it was belief in God that got you into heaven. I still don't know where I'm right and where I'm wrong on that point, but his Christian fundamentalism meant that he read the Bible closely, very closely, literary interpretive closely, but without the interpretive. And he said to me when I raised this point, because I was making the point, if you don't believe in God, you go to hell. Which is still true, by the way, through his interpretation. But I was making the point that if I raised an anthill and those ants didn't like me, wouldn't it be awfully selfish to squash them out? But worse than that, to squash them out slowly for all of eternity? And I was making the assumption that it was that belief in God that got you into heaven. But he countered my point with the statement Satan doesn't believe in God. Satan knows there's a God. Satan is not in heaven. Right. So basically, I guess I was under these sort of colloquial assumptions of Christianity that believing in Jesus gets you saved. That was not the case for his sect of Christianity. So I think that this poem is interesting taking that into account. To reveal himself to an individual does not save the individual. It is not the belief in God that gets you into heaven. So if God ambushes you in this way and surprises you and you die, that does not save you. But what is the tone of this poem? I think that literal reading actually lends itself to an ironic interpretation as well. Because if God holds this power to kill you simply by appearing, and he does it anyway, well, is that God? Couldn't God stop you from dying? Couldn't God prevent the surprise and shock from killing you? But the poet actually goes a little bit of a different direction with this. And I think if we're reading this with an ironic tone, I know that he exists. If someone who has the struggles, I will say, with religion that Emily Dickinson put on paper starts with the phrase, I know he exists, perhaps she is on one of these turns where it seems that she is devout in her religion. Or maybe she's just making fun of people who are, quote unquote, sure in his existence. Somewhere in silence. It's awfully funny how something so powerful is always so silent now. There was a time when he spoke through the clouds, when he led people, when he walked among us even. But now he's silent. He has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. Under this interpretation, maybe this is, in fact, gross as in yuck, not gross as in number. He has hid himself from our gross eyes. He's so much better than us, don't you know? 'Tis an instant's play, 'tis a fond ambush, just to make bliss earn her own surprise. How many times throughout Christianity, listen to Christian rock, how often do you hear the word joy, right? Bliss and joy are things that are supposed to be automatic in God's presence, automatic in his acceptance. But should the play prove piercing earnest, should the glee glaze in death's stiff stare, but if God shows up and he kills you, just the sight of him kills you, right? We're not supposed to be able to look upon God. That's why he had to go away. Would not the fun look too expensive? What a mocking way to say that. If it kills you, isn't that too much? Would not the jest have crawled too far? And here we get into the realm of blasphemy. Because this is asking the question, would God himself have gone too far? Would God himself have made a mistake? God is not capable of making mistakes. God is perfection, right? Perfection who created mankind and then had to kick them out of the Garden of Eden. Yeah, yeah, but perfection nonetheless. Perfection who kind of let things get out of control and had to flood the world. I mean, it was just a bad day, right? But perfection nonetheless. Perfection that when things got too bad had to send his only son to the world to be suffered, to be um, sacrificed to himself to save us from himself. Perfection, though. I think that is the tone of this voice, which, by the way, I don't think that that is blasphemous. I think that if there is this all knowing, all seeing power, to question that all knowing, all seeing power in this way should not bother that all knowing, all seeing power. We have limited understanding, but we have reasoning capacity. Shouldn't the entity with which endowed us with that reasoning capacity expect us to use it and struggle? There are certain religious individuals who say, yeah, that's the point. Not just that it's acceptable, but that's the point. Anyway, that's what I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel. There's poetry every Monday, so consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.